Like you've got like, did that itch like crazy when you drew that out or when you grew it
It
out?
did.
Yeah.
It's actually getting a little gray and multicolored. So
Well, it's funny. Like mine went from being like this orangish, like black type thing to almost gray, and I swear it adds like 10 years to my appearance. It's but I wish I could do it because my wife likes it, and I just can't tolerate the itching.
yeah, it
And
takes a little bit to get used to, but
it never
I've been
seems to
rocking
go
it for a
away
while.
either. Do you
No,
have
it
like
doesn't.
do you use like an oil or something on it with
I
any
don't.
degree
I
of
should.
regularity?
No,
Nice, nice.
just regular,
Seriously?
moisturize. Yeah,
I tell
I
you.
should. I really need to up my beard game, I think.
Well, you should, because like I said, I do have some degree of envy. So why don't you take a second, tell everybody who you are, what you do, why you should care or why they should care, all of that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. So, like you said, I'm Matt Kruth. I am a Pittsburgh Public School teacher during the day. By night, I am the chair of the North Hills Republican Committee, which makes up Ross Township and Westview Borough. And most recently, back in November, I ran for state representative in the 20th district.
And that did not go your way.
It did not,
What
as it did not
what was your
go
big
for
takeaway? Right. What was your big takeaway
a
from
lot
that?
of. Geez. I would say a couple of things. I went pretty hard after the moderate Dem vote, 65 and older. I don't regret that, but I wish I would have gone just as hard to Republicans that were not turning out to vote on a regular basis and chased them with mail-in ballots. I mean, I chased the people that applied for mail-in ballots, but I don't think I did a good enough job going out and knocking on doors and getting people to sign up for mail-in ballots.
How many doors did you knock on during your campaign?
Almost 10,000, just under 10,000.
Okay. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
funny how consistent that number is. Most of the people that I
Yeah.
know that ran for state rep, they're anywhere between 10 and 15,000 doors.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this competitive thing, right? Like I talked to, I know Rico Elmore ran for state rep in PA 16 and his big, like 13,000 doors, 30, but I know that he was in this constant, competition, particularly with Josh Kale about how many doors they were knocking on in a given day, given week. I think it's a very, very funny dynamic. Were you competing with anybody?
Well, Rico and I talked a lot. He was killing it. I got into a situation where because I'm a teacher, I was great from June until August, and then when I went back to school, it's tough. It's tough to have a full-time job and run a campaign.
Oh,
So
100%.
and then as it got closer to November, the light starts waning, and you can't get as many doors done from 4 o'clock until 6 o'clock as you could before. So. Yeah, I think that was difficult as it got closer to election day for me.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that you're a teacher, because that's primarily why I wanted to have you on. I think that your experience as an educator in a public school system as a Republican is both unique and fascinating.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is just tell me a story about what it's like to work for a public school system, particularly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it is Pittsburgh Public Schools, right?
Correct.
So tell me what that's like as a Republican with the belief systems that you have, to work within the public school systems as it exists today.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I will say this one story I can give you at the beginning is you think you're like a unicorn, like I'm the only Republican that exists in the school system. But when I ran for state rep, people see your signs and they start asking questions. And then those questions, in the teacher's room devolve into text messages after school hours and whatnot. And I was actually surprised. I mean, we're still in the minority, but I was actually surprised how many people told me they were Republican or they were registered Democrat because they were in the teachers union, but they voted Republican. Some people just outright surprised or shocked. But, I believe in both sides of it, right? Like
Sure.
practice what I preach, which is I don't want my beliefs seeping into what I'm teaching kids, right? So I check that at the door. I'm there to teach reading. I teach reading. And then when I'm outside of school and I'm talking to friends and colleagues, that's when we get into the political discussions. But you work with people, and it's you don't want to make enemies with people that you're with 8 hours a day. So try to keep the conversation light. But Yeah, but so to get to your question, it's tough. I mean, it's definitely an uphill battle being a conservative and teaching in the public school system. So you run into ideologies that don't mesh with yours. But like I said, my primary goal is right now I'm a literacy coach, and I'm working with K through 5 students, and my primary goal is to make sure that they are able to read and getting reading instruction, and make sure that I'm working with teachers to be able to do that. So.
What kind of drop off do you think we experienced through COVID? Like when you talk about reading proficiency and things of that nature?
uh, Immense. It's scary. So I just moved to a K through 5 building. I've been a teacher in Pittsburgh Public for 20 years. This is my 20th year. I spent a majority of that time in middle school, and I just recently dropped down to elementary school. And within the last 8 years or so, I cannot believe I'm working with 4th and 5th grade teachers on how to teach kids how to read, because they had lost so much learning. And 4th and 5th grade teachers never had to worry about phonics. They never had to worry
Sure.
about, teaching kids that that skill. And it's tough because it's out of their skill set. So you're asking somebody to do something that's, different or new for them. And it's kind of like on the job training. They never thought that they were going to have to do that. So, and, Pittsburgh Public was one of the ones that stayed in masks the longest. And that was challenging. So,
do you think there's a connection between, because obviously there are two dynamics with regard to COVID that I think had an impact on education. One was obviously the closures and the move towards a more technology-based education, for lack of a better way to phrase it. And then obviously the masks issue, right? And particularly when it comes to reading and the way in which kids learn to do that, oftentimes by watching someone else read to them. How significant of a problem do you think that was, particularly from the mask perspective?
Yeah, huge. Kids need to see how you form your mouth when you're talking. What sounds make where your tongue goes for different sounds. It's tough, and they can't see it, they can't hear it. I'm standing up at the front of the classroom, helping a teacher to teach kids, and you're always trying to pull your mask away just so they could see how your mouth moved.
Yeah.
And then kind of looking over your shoulder to make sure no one was looking, so you didn't get in trouble. But it's the consequences are real, and we're seeing it play out, in real time. And we talked. I was on a panel when I was running for state rep. I was on a panel of people running for U.S. Congress, lieutenant governor, state reps. I was the only Republican on the panel, and we talked a lot about this. And one of the things that they said about masks and being in there for so long is you have this irreparable harm that you've done for so long. And some of these students were already at a disadvantage because they have heard less words or been read to less. And it's challenging because they're already starting out in some cases at a deficit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the most recent statistic that I saw, and I hate the fact that I can't reference it off the top of my head, but I can, but it was roughly 18 months. So, COVID response policy as it relates to public school systems took us back 18 months. And, to your point, when you're dealing with children that are already at a disadvantage, that type of situation is catastrophic, in terms of their ability to learn, especially when you talk about something as foundational as reading, right? Because so much of what you learn as you move forward through K-12 is reliant upon your ability to read and understand what you're reading. So, from my perspective, I think this is probably one of the single most unreported consequences of COVID. I mean, we hear a lot about it in our circles, but when you talk about mass media and the coverage, that the consequences of some of the choices that were frankly put on pedestals by a lot of these organizations, obviously I don't expect them to take responsibility for them per se, but, we do need to look at the elephant in the room here and understand that, our choices, regardless of their intent, did have very significant consequences. So I guess what I'd like to do is understand from your perspective what is being done at the public school level to play catch up, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a lot of this is a lot of my job too, is looking at instruction and where we call it reading intervention, and what students specifically need, something prescribed for them. They're lacking this. We can do a lot of screeners on kids. This is what they're lacking. This is where their deficits are. And then we have to actually be able to produce some sort of curriculum or some sort of program for them to go through. Like I said, the challenge is that you have a lot of teachers that aren't trained to do this. You go back to when I was beginning to be a teacher back in 2003. I went to get my master's degree. I had a K through 6 certificate. I could teach anything K through 6. And now we're in a position where you're asking teachers that maybe have never taught reading before. They've always been a math teacher. Now they're kind of forced to be a reading interventionist, right? They're actually providing some instruction for students because we have to ramp up what we lost. So it's difficult. And then it becomes on-the-job training.
Oh, for sure. So I'm trying to figure out, like, I know in our school district, one of the big things that came out of COVID was the technology adoption, right? So every kid has an iPad now. Pretty much everything they do is on these iPads. I don't know, did they do something similar to that in Pittsburgh Public Schools?
We did. Yeah, but it was one of the things that we were kind of behind the 8 ball on. So we pushed those out. I think we shut down like everyone else in March. And we literally gave kids packets from March until June because we didn't have technology. So all summer long, they're ramping up the technology aspect of it. And we didn't push out technology until the rest of the year, the next year.
Do you see that as a good thing or a bad thing, the technology?
I mean, it's not a replacement for a teacher. There's, times that it could be beneficial for students. It depends on how you're organizing your classroom, right? And how much control you have over that technology and what kids can do. But I get frustrated because I don't want kids on tech. I want them to be with a teacher. But like I said, when we have intense interventions for kids, depending on how your school's made up, could be a benefit when you need to teach a very small group of students. So if you're talking about 5th grade students and they still don't know, we call them CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant words, you have to provide instruction for those kids. So, it's helpful to have a program for other kids to use the technology in class while you're working with small groups, but it's never a replacement. There's no program that's going to, take over good teaching, quality teaching for kids.
My biggest challenge is that, when the switch was made, my understanding has always been that if a parent wants real textbooks, for example, to be sent home with their kids, that's something that can happen. But apparently it's a lot more difficult than at least I thought it was. I had requested books for my son as soon as the school year had started, and we received one, I think, of the 5 or 6 core classes that he has. And so it's particularly difficult for me as a parent to understand where I can contribute to my son's educational journey. Because, we'll get emails like, this is a problem. And, you're trying to navigate the technology and figure out, okay, well, where is the homework assignments? What was done? What needs to be done? It's like a jigsaw puzzle.
The worst. And I will say this, I am not a fan of, it for students, what you're talking about, where you have online textbooks especially for younger kids. We haven't run into that problem in the city. We haven't run into that problem with our own son. They still have sons. They still have, textbooks. But it's shocking. They have access to an online version of it. And when they come home and they just bring their iPad, I'm like, no, you can't just bring your iPad. Right. I can't flip through 20 pages. I can't, underline something. I can't, put a Post-it note under what I want you to look at. So, and it's just being on a device. My youngest son, he struggled. He was a struggling reader, and COVID did not help him at all. It just clicked for him. He's in 4th grade, going into 5th grade, and it just clicked for him recently. But
so, what do you think the benefit is for a school system to keep the technology in place, even though most schools are open for business now and it's almost business as usual?
Again, for a supplement, for, programs when you're working in small groups, but it becomes a babysitter sometimes. A teacher's off, you don't get a sub, you have somebody else in the room and they say, go on your, devices. And it becomes more of an issue for people. Again, pros and cons to it, but it's never going to place good instruction by a teacher.
I can't stand push button functionality of all of it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
I remember, and don't get me, I mean, I can be an old school guy when it comes to, my experience as a kid and how I want those experiences translated to what my son sees every day. But the reality is that, my first grader, who is at a Christian academy here in Swickley, has better handwriting than my soon to be 13-year-old.
Yeah.
And, mind you, boys tend to have sloppier handwriting than girls do to begin with. But in this case, I'm looking at it like, all right, well, you spent the last 3 years really not having to write very much.
Right.
And so what is the process for improving your handwriting if it's not a required skill any longer? Does
Right.
that make sense?
Well, oh, absolutely. To your point, my son just had it was a one-off, but had a spelling test on Google Forms. I was like, no, we're not doing we're not just picking multiple choice, which one, looks correct. I want him writing this out.
Right.
He needs to be able to do this. It's a skill, you have to master. It was a one-off, but still, it's, you get into that, and then you have newer teachers maybe that want to incorporate it, but then don't know how to use it as a supplement and use it as the core. And I think that there's a lot of responsibility involved, when you give those kids a device and what you're doing, and is it thoughtful? Is it meaningful? Is it going to benefit them? Is there a specific reason you're doing that? As a teacher and a literacy coach, that's what I ask teachers all the time. What's the benefit? Why are we doing
it's funny. We've been told for years, especially leading up to COVID, like screen time for kids is bad. Screen time for kids is bad. Right. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, we really don't have any choice. So we're going to adopt this technology. And now you don't really hear that screen time is bad anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, so which one was it? Was it bad or is it good?
Is it good? Right.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I'm left wondering, like, I understand the change agent involved, right? COVID presented some unique challenges. We had to get through those challenges. But now that things are kind of, better, lack of a better way to phrase it, why do we need this technology? And it's concerning for people that tend to read more than I should, I guess, is probably a good way to put it. Because I'm curious where the technology came from. Where does the software that runs these iPads and the educational experience that kids have on these apps, where does it come from? Do you have any insight into that at all?
Do you mean specifically to, the curriculum that they're being taught?
Yeah. Where does it come from? Who created it?
I mean, content, whoever's creating the curriculum that you're using. So if you're using we use Pearson, which is now Savvis, they push out a digital component. We don't lean heavily on it in the city, but there are districts, that do. That's solely what they use, like to your point, what you said earlier. So whoever the textbook manufacturer is, they push out a digital component to it. And sure enough, they're making a pretty penny on that,
sure
extra. And they put all their resources now into that. Our digital component is pretty heavy. We just don't use it just because our technology isn't all that reliable or fantastic since we're pushing it out to almost 20,000 students. But
my experience.
Those are the creators. And to your point of a little bit earlier, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
Do you have access to it? How hard is it to find all of it? How, what can you preview as a parent versus as a kid or, as a teacher? I know the back end of it, so I see everything.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, a lot of it has to do with privacy, right? Because, based on my experience with machine learning and AI and, a whole bunch of other things that go into how computers are capable of collecting and aggregating information, we know that these iPads are collecting data on students, right? So all it takes is a unique identification number per student, right? And the test scores that they produce over a period of time. And before long, you're going to be able to look at the scores and the outcomes, collect all this information and predict whether or not a 12-year-old is going to be a doctor or a garbage man. And that's a very scary proposition from my perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, in some extent that happens already. I mean, we have, access as educators to, state online portals where we can see aggregates of information for all of the students in our building, all of the students in the district, and predictability on what they're going to achieve, or what they could achieve.
Right.
So,
So what about when you look at technology? I mean, technology is one piece of it. Obviously when we talk about education, particularly in the circles that we travel in, we have to hit on some stuff like CRT. Yeah. And, the way in which, that type of platform is being introduced at the K-12 level. And, I love the counter argument to this, right? Where there's no class called CRT. Right. So
Right.
we know there's no class called CRT. That's not what we're saying is happening here. So do you have any specific, like based on your experience as an educator, how serious of a problem is this?
I mean, it exists, right? It's people's ideologies being pushed into the classroom. I tell, being the chair of the Republican committee here in North Hills, I tell a lot of our potential school board candidates, the back door for a lot of this is in teacher training, professional development for teachers. That's where I received it. And ultimately they want it to be pushed back out to you. But that's something that goes kind of unnoticed. And if you have school board members that are looking at, like, who are we asking to train our teachers? What are we asking them to push out the teachers? I can tell you that there are very few school board members that would probably have that depth of knowledge about what are their teachers being trained, how are they being trained, by whom are they being trained, and that's probably one of the most backdoor ways of getting it in there, and then having teachers push it out. And then you have to look at, not necessarily CRT, but social emotional learning and where it's appearing, right? So we're piloting and by we're, I mean the district that my children are in, not the one that I teach in, a math program. And there's nothing harmful about the questions that are being asked, these social emotional questions, but there's a lot of them in the math curriculum. How do you work through problems with peers? What do you do when you get angry? But it happens a lot throughout the lesson. And when you only have 45 minutes or 80 minutes to teach a math class, you wonder, how much are you getting done in math, right? And how far is the teacher going with those questions, or how many students are participating in those versus not participating. And again, there's nothing harmful in asking, what do you do when you get frustrated? I get frustrated with math, but it's how much time do you spend on it, and how much what are you putting into it as the teacher, and your beliefs and your thoughts. And I think that's the challenging part, right? With things like that. Nobody wants our kids to struggle. Nobody wants our kids to, be in a state of panic all the time. You want to help students. That's your goal as a teacher. My goal as a teacher is to help students with math and help students with reading. So,
Tell me more about this training that you went through. Specific to indoctrination is not the right term. I mean, it probably is, but I want to be lighter than that. When you go through the process of getting, a secondary education, or going through a certificate course, or trying to get some sort of continuing education requirement satisfied, how much of what you're learning is designed to help you push forward a specific political agenda?
I can't speak too much to it other than what happens in our district. Our district is a little bit different because it's so big and it is pretty diverse. I think that a lot of the teacher trainings are focused, most of the teacher trainings are focused on curriculum, but then it's dependent upon who's providing them. Are there people from the curriculum team outside of our district that are pushing in? Some of them are specific to racial issues. We did something called Courageous Conversations through, I want to say, Pacific Education Group was the name of it. And that was a pretty intense training that we received, diversity training that we received. That I felt was aimed at literally splitting the races in the room that we were in, and that was uncomfortable and challenging,
to say the least, right?
To say the least, yeah. So And I think it was meant to be. I think that was pretty much what it was meant to be.
Is there a defined problem that you can think of that these types of initiatives are designed to solve?
No, I don't think they're. I don't.
Left it at no.
No, I don't. I don't think that they're intended to solve anything. I think that they're intended to murky the water and to I mean, change ideologies. But again, I don't know how people get this far in. I think of it a lot. How do you get this far away from what your sole purpose was? Like, I was a political science major when I was in college. I wasn't even an education major. I went to college just for my education, or my master's in education at Duquesne. And like, all you want to do is teach. Like, I was just like, I want to teach kids how to read. Like, what's more exciting than that, And I don't know how you get so far from wanting to teach kids how to read. And I think that there's a core group of teachers that are that don't push the agenda, or that don't, keep forcing the issue, and that just kind of melt into the classroom and do their thing.
Is there any sort of backlash to that? Like when you don't participate?
Yeah. When you don't participate, there's a lot of backlash when you don't participate. But when it comes down to it, Doug, I think that there are, like I said, there are a group of people that, like, for me, I don't care. Like, I just want to teach. I just want to get in there and do my thing, and I want teachers to get in there and do their thing. You will get pushback. I mean, you get pushback from anything, right? And especially when you're going in trying to get somebody to change the way that they're doing something. But yeah.
So how many teachers do you think agree with your general perspective on this, that this is not a thing that needs to be shoehorned into, the curriculum for every school across the state, or even the country for that matter?
I'd like to think a majority of them, and that there are a few, that don't. But I think in reality, there's probably more that are just doing it because it's easier to, kind of like what you said, conform and do, than it is to kind of stand up and say, well, I'm not going to do that, or it's not the route that I'm going. And they get worried a little bit about backlash, from that, and, what that entails. But it takes somebody with kind of, a backbone to say, like, I don't believe that this is what we should be doing with kids and how we should be educating children.
You talked about school boards and their involvement in understanding the degree to which these things are going on, and that sort of thing. So obviously we're in a municipal year. So there are, at least in the state of Pennsylvania, there are 500 school districts. Between 4 and 5 seats will be open per school district. So there's a lot of opportunity for the party statewide to get better at making sure that we're putting the right people forward for those types of positions. But can you talk a little bit about your experience with school boards in a general sense, how much power they really do have, and how much insight they have into what's really going on behind the walls of their schools?
How much power they have, I think, is determined upon where they are and who holds the majority, obviously. I think that I'd like to think that some of them are very keen on analyzing and looking through, but I think there are some people that are just not prepared for what they get themselves into at school boards. And, I told you before when we talked about this, I have school board members potential candidates coming over tonight, because I want to make sure that they're ready for it. And that's what happens. Some of them, CRT, like I said, is a thing, and it's not like it doesn't exist, but some of them want to go in there and focus on CRT, and they realize it's an issue, but it's not a huge issue, or it's not happening as much as I thought it was, or there's other things going on, or I had no idea how to negotiate a teacher contract, or I didn't know that there was a buildings and grounds committee that I was going to be on, so there are multifaceted, these are multifaceted positions, and people have to be ready for all facets of them. And I think you're exactly right. It's about educating people and making sure that you have a message and making sure that you're, well versed on what you do and what you're going to have to do and what the time commitment's going to be. And, I think
It's funny. Because I agree with you completely. I think that a lot of school board candidates get into this with a misunderstanding of the role that they're going to be stepping into. And the reality is, at least from my perspective, there are two key things. I mean, one, obviously, you're looking to create the best educational environment for your district as possible. Yeah. That's a given, right? But the reality is that the single biggest reason that this is a contentious role, that it's a difficult role, is that you are making decisions about taxpayer dollars and where those things are going to be spent. And that's where most of the contention in my experience comes from. The overwhelming majority of taxpayers in a given town may not even have children in the district. So their sole and exclusive interest in what's happening with this district is related to their property taxes. So it's hard because in one respect, you want your school district to be the best it can be, particularly if you have children in the district. On the other hand, you are elected to represent the taxpayers at the table. And this is particularly interesting when it comes to the negotiations with unions, because at the end of the day, the single biggest contributor, one of the biggest contributors to the Democratic National Party are teachers unions. And there's lots of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, we know that money is trickling down and supporting school board candidates that are ultimately
they're going behind closed doors and negotiating contracts.
Right. So you were saying they're contributing to electing the people who are going to the negotiating table on our behalf. Yep. And this creates, in my mind, a significant conflict of interest. So
100%.
What can be done?
It's one of the reasons I ran for state representative, because I said between the issues that we're having with curriculum, the issues that we're having with parents having access to curriculum, the issues that we're having with a teacher shortage, and I use that term loosely because, I won't go into that, but teacher shortage and the unions. You need state legislation to actually be passed to not have this happen, to not be able to have unions contribute and prop up Democratic candidates that are then going to go behind closed doors and negotiate contracts with their members. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
And unfortunately, we've got ourselves in a bit of a sticky wicket now because, let's be honest, there's not going to be any significant legislation that prevents an organization or a union from providing significant amounts of money to the party in charge, so to speak, right? Which is one of the reasons why I thought this past election was so important, because, we have to have some semblance of sanity, or at least the right people asking the right questions when it comes time to review possible legislation that would deal with these challenges. But to me, these things are so simplistic that it drives me insane that they don't have simple answers, right? It's all politics. And that's one of the biggest challenges, because at the end of the day, we're talking about our kids and where they spend 6, 7, 8 hours a day. It's a real problem.
It is. It's a huge problem. And like we said, I mean, you need people in there that are going to make sound decisions. And I don't know that we have that right now. So it's going to be a challenge, an ongoing challenge. But to your point, this affects kids, right? It's not just I think about unions. I think about my dad being in IBW. They were looking out for their guys, right? And the teachers' unions are looking out for their guys, but the unintended consequence is that there's kids involved. So when you're putting the interest of your members over what might be the best interest of, in the best interest of students, that's when it gets a little sticky, and that's the challenge of a teachers union. And you're in Pennsylvania, so you're talking about one of the most powerful teachers unions in the country, probably within the top 5 to 10.
Absolutely. Yeah, I keep hitting on this, but at the end of the day, I just have a real issue with the people elected to represent me at the negotiating table being bought and paid for by the organization that they're negotiating with. But I also think that from an expenditure standpoint, the single most important investment the school districts make is in quality teachers. In my home district, for example, we're dealing with an infrastructure question. They want to build a new high school. it would take me 4 years to go through that on a podcast. But we also have looming teachers contract negotiations coming up, and I've wondered, like, okay, this capital investment we want to make, should that be the priority? Is that what's going to make our district a great district, or is it the people that are teaching the kids? Now, I would argue there's a combination of both, but you understand what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the scary part is, you're looking for quality teachers, and because of the way that the state legislature has set up teacher certification and the way that our teachers are being taught in undergraduate and graduate schools, depends in some regards on what the state is determining their priorities and their agenda are. And I'd say that you're not going to get the top tier candidates until you start changing how those things are being run, how teacher certification is being run, how teacher training is being taught. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Do you
think that's a significant roadblock? Getting quality teaching candidates is being made more difficult by the policies that are in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Or the lack thereof. And they have a new, it's called Science of Reading bill that's out. And I would say that, I think it was passed a year and a half ago. But Pennsylvania, there's 38 states that have introduced this. And this is really getting at the root of how do kids learn how to read, and teaching teachers to teach kids how to read, because that doesn't happen in undergraduate teacher preparation programs. I can guarantee you that. But Pennsylvania is one of the weakest science of reading bills. That passed the state legislature 203-0, unanimous. I wouldn't have voted on it because it doesn't go near what needs to happen to prepare.
So what does need to happen? Tell me about your dream scenario in that regard. Yeah.
What needs to happen is one of the things, and my guess is that the teachers union played a role in this bill. I don't know that for certain, but that's my guess, because again, we have one of the states with the strongest teachers unions. And one of the criteria that a lot of other states implemented was having to get this training to keep your certification. And Pennsylvania didn't sign on to that. And my guess is because it burdened the members of the union to have to go back and receive this training kind of retroactively. Mm-hmm. But we didn't receive it. I didn't receive it. I thought in my head I didn't receive training on how to teach kids how to read because I only went for a master's program that was 1 year. And then come to find out, as I'm a literacy coach, nobody's receiving these programs. I just talked to a teacher that just graduated and is a student teacher now. And she said, I don't know how to teach kids how to read. They don't teach me that. And I'm like, you're in a first grade class. You need to know how to teach kids how to read. That's a priority. So, and
it's funny too, because when you think about ways to mitigate the consequences of COVID response policy as it relates to education loss, having teachers that are cross-certified might not be the best term, but at the end of the day, teachers that are capable of teaching catch up on reading, math, and some other, reading comprehension, basic skills that you need to move forward in history and so on and so forth. I think that having teachers that are capable of bridging that gap a little bit, and taking a kid who might be a year or 18 months behind in a given discipline and helping them elevate just slightly, and then have all the teachers have the capability of doing that. I think that could be a huge way to mitigate some of the lost learning that we've experienced.
Yeah, there's no reason right now. I told you before, I was a K through 6. There's probably, I'd say, about 80% of teachers, if I had to guess, that are elementary school teachers fall under my certificate because it was around for years and years and years. It's K through 6 general. You can teach anything you want. They've changed that to K through 4, pre-K through 4 now. I would suggest that they even do it to 3, and I would suggest that they pair it with a reading specialist certificate, which is an additional certificate that people can receive with additional course work. But that's our biggest problem right now. Kids can't read, and if they can't read, they can't do a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how to teach them how to read, or you don't know what intervention to provide for students that are struggling with this aspect versus this aspect, you're going to have a kid that can't read for quite a while. And if you're from a single family household and your mom's working or dad's working and working two jobs, it makes it even more difficult. So,
and parents aren't great at it either, right? I mean,
no.
a lot of parents send their kids to school hoping that, this is my one and only chance to get my child an education because I know I can't do it. For a lot of different reasons. I mean, the reality is that it's difficult for parents to teach kids anything. I mean, your boys are approaching teenagehood very soon. Right? You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. God bless the homeschoolers because I don't know how they do it. I couldn't teach my own kid.
Well, what's really funny though is like when we can get into school choice a little bit. So my son goes to public school here, but my daughters both go to a Christian academy. That was kind of a pop-up deal and only started about 2.5 years ago, largely in response to COVID dynamics. And their experience has been wholly different, but it's classified as homeschool, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you have is a scenario where you can technically homeschool your kid, but we can get them a really high quality education that is largely not connected to, the big apparatus with the unions and the public school systems and all of that kind of stuff. Do you feel just, and I don't know if you're experiencing, any sort of significant attrition within Pittsburgh Public Schools, but I do know that a lot of districts are starting to see a drop off of enrollment because parents are finding alternatives. Do you think that's a beneficial thing or not?
Yeah, I can't think of anything more inherently sad than to force a kid to stay in a failing school that doesn't have the means, whose parents don't have the means to move to a different school district. And I say that knowing that some of the schools that I teach at are not up to par, and it's not for a lack of teachers trying. It's for a lack of, in some cases, teachers knowing or teachers having the ability to do. And then pair that with students that we know, studies show that students from a lower socioeconomic status just have heard far fewer words or been exposed to far fewer words than their high socioeconomic counterparts, which already puts them at a disadvantage. So when you're starting at a disadvantage and then you have teachers that were never trained on how to do this, and then you have programs that aren't where they need to be or haven't been funded or invested in or vetted, it's a recipe for disaster, really.
Yeah.
So it's challenging, and people I've been asked point blank by teachers that I teach with, how can you be okay with it? And I said, it's not because you're a bad teacher. It's because you weren't given the necessary things that you needed to know in undergraduate during what you actually have, the curriculum that you're teaching. You're already teaching students that are having difficulties, and maybe you don't know exactly what they need specifically to remedy the situation. It's a very compounded, it's not an easy thing. But then there are pockets of excellence that you see all over. And students have, in Pittsburgh Public, we have a pretty robust magnet program. My wife teaches at a magnet school that's pretty sought after. So you have these pockets of kind of shining stars and schools that are showing lots of growth. They may not have hit the mark yet, but their students are growing, and it shows that they're staying. The longer that they stay at the school, the better that they're doing. So it's a game that takes time. It's not gonna happen overnight, right? It's not, we're not playing a 1-inning game. You're playing a 9-inning game that it's going to take a bit of time.
And what does change look like? And that's why I want you to put your other hat on. So you're a committee man, right?
Yeah.
And you have an in-depth understanding of all things Republican politics, particularly in our area here in Allegheny County, maybe even Western Pennsylvania in a general sense. But, we, and you and I have talked about this several times, we have a problem as a party. And, it's going to be, at least in my mind, incumbent upon people like you and like me, people that are, not quite 50 yet, that have novel and fresh approaches to some of these challenges. But, first and foremost, obviously you ran last year in the midterm. You weren't successful. A lot of people that were in your position, first time candidates, were not successful. What do you think, in a general sense, statewide, what were the single biggest reasons that non-incumbent Republican candidates struggled last year?
Gosh, do we have another hour?
Yeah, we do. We can talk for as long as you like.
I think the message in some cases got away from us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the abortion issue played a bigger factor than most people thought. Mail-in ballots are a huge issue, and getting people out to vote in person and beforehand. We've talked about, numerous times, people, this 50-yard dash mentality. We're all running, and we have one day to do it. They have 50 days to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many factors that went into it. And I told you at the beginning, for me, I don't regret chasing that 65 and older vote, because I know that there were a ton of moderate Democrats out there that voted for me. But there was a whole nother aspect to that I don't know that I had a grasp on.
You hit on the big ones, I think. The mail-in ballot issue is probably the single biggest one that we have. And I've told a lot of people this. We have a year to figure this out. Stop talking about change through legislation, because let's be honest, with our current House makeup and the fact that we've got a Democratic governor, it's not going to happen. So we can complain about this until we're blue in the face, but the reality is we have to conform to the new standards. And so I have yet to see a comprehensive strategy on how we're going to do that. Now, I feel, based on what my company does, I feel like I've got a piece of that, but it's only a piece. We need a comprehensive platform on how the Republican Party is going to deal with the challenge of mail-in ballots. I think there's some good things coming down the pike with that, but we need to refine and test our strategy for this year so that we can perfect it next year.
That's exactly what I said, because this is what I said to our committee last month. Anything that's coming down the pike, like you said, is for next election. It's not happening, this May. It's not happening this November. So that's for us to go out and do that. It's challenging. I just went to a vice chair committee meeting this weekend, and it's challenging because I look at some of these committees, and they're talking about cold calling, they're ones and twos, and I look at mine, where I live in Ross, we have 20,000 voters. We're just getting. I can't do it.
No.
We're analyzing the data, and we're seeing if this person lives here and then this person moved, and I can't do it. I can do it on a small, precinct level, but we live in a big township, and it's challenging. So it's incumbent upon, and we're doing our best as a committee to fill seats and build our committee and grow our committee, and that's really the only way to do it. Because until we have, because we're combined with Westview, we have 80 seats to fill. We have 40 districts times 2. So, it's who has 80 people that are getting involved on a regular basis. But we're doing our best to try to engage people and get people out, because that's the only way you're going to make change, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way that you're going to make inroads.
Have you talked to Len Iorio at all about this?
Yeah, actually, just on Saturday.
So
we're going to get him involved in our committee and come talk.
He's a machine when it comes to all things precinct building. He actually wrote. So he did this for me. He wrote me he wrote a paper on the best practices for building a committee, and it was a lot of find the people who are your strong Republicans, right? So your 5 of 5s that come out and volunteer once in a while. Get those people in a room and explain to them how important this is. He's had a lot of really interesting experiences, and that's actually, so he gave me this paper, and it's a downloadable on my website now. So Lenny, thanks buddy. But that type of thing's important, right? Because what we're talking about in the general sense is sharing best practices. And it's particularly at the grassroots level of things. So precinct committee people, municipal committees, they just don't share. And it's not because there's like a competitive advantage developed. It's just because there's no communication infrastructure. There's no platform. There's no playbook, right? Everybody thinks there's a playbook. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I told Lenny about when we talk about precinct building is, okay, so you've got a volunteer. That volunteer wants to become committee man for his precinct. It's a vacant spot. He can be appointed. Great. So he gets the role. Then what?
What do you do?
What does he do?
Yeah.
What's his job?
Right.
Like how do you do that job?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And here, when I was appointed chair of my committee a year and a half ago, we had 9 committee people out of 40. Well, 80 times 2. Sure. Nothing. And no offense to the people that were involved because they still help out and they're still involved, but most of them were 70 and over.
Right.
You walk into a meeting and there's like 5 people and I'm like, how are these people going to help me, do X, Y, or Z?
Right.
We're up to 21 now, elected, and then we have another 5 appointed, but, we still got a ways to go, but you're exactly right. What do you do with those people? I mean, it's incumbent upon me to kind of relay to them, like, these are the expectations. And then you have people that are like, I've been doing this for years. Nobody asked me to do any of this. I don't want to do it anymore. And you're like, okay, we'll take baby steps. We'll do something a little bit, smaller. But being a committee person isn't, sitting there coming to a meeting once a month. It's not growing a committee. It's not getting people elected. So there's more to it than that. And that's what we've got to get to, because we're always going to be behind the 8 ball until we actually get people out there and motivated. And everyone has different skill sets, right? It's not always knocking on doors and, cold calling people. But I mean,
well, those 2 things are the big apprehension. You know that, right?
They are. Right. Exactly. They're what people don't want to do.
Right.
I mean,
but there are things that you can do. And that's why, because one of the things you hit on was the age challenge, right?
Yeah.
So most of the people that volunteer in this type of thing are 65 plus. That's just the reality. But as those people get older and are no longer able to participate or, just simply die, right? What is our plan to backfill our volunteer network? And until we can answer the question of there's a lot more to do other than show up at a meeting once a month, right? Like we have to have a plan. Like, okay, these are the 10 things that your committee needs to do. Yes, door knocking and cold calling may or may not be a part of it, but if you don't want to do that, find a volunteer that'll do it. We have people with our CAC right now that are all they want to do is door knock. Yeah. It's psychotic in my opinion because I'm naturally introverted, which is a surprise to some people, but it gives me a lot of anxiety to knock on a door and talk about politics with someone who might yell at me. Right? That's a scary thing.
It's what a lot of people feel.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got to find a way to silo the skill sets and find people that are good at this type of thing. That might be email and making a weekly newsletter, something like that, something they can do behind a desk. Yep. Could be something as simple as building a podcast, right? There's lots of ways, especially when you're talking about a district with a lot of voters. If you have 20,000 voters, there's an audience there, right? Like there are things that people can do.
Yep. Bulk mail. We did that on my campaign. Well, I have to give a shout out to 2 of the 65 plus group. One of them probably addressed about 2,000 envelopes for me themselves, and the other one, 65 and older, she knocked probably, I'd say, close to 1,000 doors herself.
That's fantastic.
So those 2 people are heroes in my book. But we need more people like them. But to your point, there's tons of things that these people, the committee people, can do to get involved, and it doesn't necessarily involve door knocking. Although that's probably one of the better things to actually do, make that voter contact. But and it's just getting, like you said, getting other people involved. If not you, find me somebody that will. Right.
I mean, that's the thing, right? You've got to constantly be building your volunteer, infrastructure here in the Quaker Valley area. We have 11 municipalities. We have roughly 13,000 voters or so, right? So we have our elected committee people, but then each of those committee people has 1 or 2 volunteers, people that they can rely on, to do things that, frankly, just take time. because not everybody can dedicate a significant amount of time to this type of thing, but it's important work. And that's one of the reasons why I support Lenny the way I do, is because what he's doing for Allegheny County is going to establish the standard for how this is not done. Not just like if I have my way, not just in the state of Pennsylvania, but nationally, because this is how we win, right?
And you're exactly right. And to your point about finding, the skill sets of these people, we have committee people that we have one that's over 70 but was a school board member, and he's integral in talking to candidates that are going to be school board members. We have people that are their specialties in accounting. I was like, use your skill to talk to these commissioner candidates about what does it look like to intensely look at a budget line by line. I mean, it's something boring, but it's going to be something that they're expected to do, and they need to know how to go through it and weed it and parse and figure these kinds of things out. So to your point, like training potential candidates from older committee members that have a skill set and, X, Y, or Z. I mean, these are all things that need to happen, because if I said from the beginning when I took over the committee, you don't win elections. I mean, this is kind of obvious. You don't win elections unless you have candidates on the ballot. And you don't have candidates on the ballot unless you go out and start finding candidates, and then on top of it, training those candidates to be, because they're not going to have all the skill sets and, one person to be the best school board member, or to be the best commissioner, borough council, or whatever.
And it's such a hard job. So let's spend our last few minutes talking a little bit more about the Republican Party in a general sense, because I know you have a lot of thoughts and feelings on this. So what are the three things that the party needs to do? And we could talk about PAGOP or the RNC or however you want to, slice it. What three things do we need to do this year to put ourselves in best position to have a successful municipal election this year, obviously, but also going into 2024?
Change perception about mail-in ballots. Number one. I mean,
within the party.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, no, it is. It is. I mean, from my perspective, that one issue will get us 80% of the way there. I'm convinced of it, right? Because look at the majority of people who are incapacitated to the degree that they would want to use a mail-in ballot, right? Most of them are Republicans.
Yeah.
Right. So this is one of those things where, if we can if we can solve this one problem, we're going to be 80% of the way there. But that's not the only thing. So what else is there?
We have the winning agenda and the winning policy, but we don't know how to market it and present it. We've got to get better at messaging.
You sound like me.
Yeah. I mean, really, you know that better than anyone. I mean, we have this set of ideologies that I think that a vast majority of people actually agree with, but we don't have a way of conveying that message in a clear format that could be dispersed to large swaths of people.
No, I told you about my idea of 100 people, right? I want to put 100 people in a room, and I still want to do that. The logistics of it are mind-boggling and a little scary because the net result of the meeting is going to be just absolute chaos. Because what I want is a giant board, and I'm going to put Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other side, and I'm just going to give everybody pens. Say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to walk up to the board and write an idea or a policy position or something and put it on the left or the right. Okay. And somebody's going to write abortion. Somebody's going to write, school choice. It's going to be a list, right? But we're going to be able to look at just a few of those things. Abortion's probably the single biggest one. Anything related to LGBTQ issues is going to be another issue, right? So you take all of the things on the list that we put down that are important. So for me, it's personal freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. It's a commitment to low taxes. It's states' rights when it comes to, our power within our government's infrastructure. Those three things are the most important, right? So we circle LGBTQ and abortion, right? And we say, okay, because we focus on these two things, not only does it cost us everything else on this list, but it gives the winning hand to the other side of the column.
Yep.
And I can tell you 15 people that would literally get up out of the room and walk out right then and there, which is disappointing because we have to have this conversation. And if we don't have it soon, it's going to cost candidates this fall. And then God forbid going into 2024.
Yep.
I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah. Which probably is number 3 for me, which is the internal division.
Yeah.
The rhino, right? The name calling, the fracture, the split, you're not conservative enough, you're not to the right enough, you're too moderate, you're too this, you're too that. I wish I would remember it. I just sent it to somebody, saw a meme that basically went to that effect, sure. Right? People, we just won't go. We just won't vote for that person because they're too extreme. They're not.
So who are you voting for in that scenario?
Yeah. So who are you voting for? Nobody. We just don't show up.
Nobody. Right. So
the Dems
you
will vote for the Dems until they're blue in the face. At the D next, they'll do it. It's not a problem. And we'll just say, I'll stay home. The
number of people that I've seen declare themselves independent just over the results of the 2020 election, and then some of the conversations that, because there's plenty of people that don't like me, right? And they don't like me because I'm a moderate. Fine. I don't know what to do with that. But at the end of the day, my interest is in getting Republicans elected. And it's not about getting my personal viewpoint enacted in policy. It's about looking at the reality of our circumstances and saying, okay, is this candidate, and this is when we get to the primary dynamics, this is what I'm talking about. Is this candidate someone who can win? Yes or no? Yep. It doesn't need, I like Doug Mastriano. I've always liked Doug Mastriano. I knew in May of last year he wasn't going to win because he was just not someone who was appealing enough to the masses. And the counter argument you hear is we shouldn't be nominating candidates that way. Well, okay, but we saw what happened. Not only did Doug lose, but it cost down ballot candidates a fortune.
Everybody else down ballot. Yeah, yes. Absolutely. Yep.
And we've got 100%. To address this issue. It's, for me, it's one of the single most important things, which is why I want to have my meeting, right? I think, and to be honest, I was put up to it. Someone I'm going to be doing a podcast with here, hopefully in the next week or so, put me up to it. And, he's a great guy, but he's right. He's absolutely right. This is something that needs to happen. And it needs to be people who can go out, go home, go back to their precincts, go back to their municipalities and say, guys, we had a conversation and we have a real problem and we think we have a solution. And these are the 3 things we're going to do differently this year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
the challenging part is, I think in some committees, you're going to find that the pushback is going to be from the committee people because they're the ones that are those far right, rhino hating.
That's true.
People, and that becomes the tough part, right? Because you have to have a committee that's filled with varying types of people that all believe in what you said before about personal freedoms and lower taxes and less government. And they're going to run the gamut from moderate to somewhere in the middle to far right. So we're gonna have to figure out.
Us young guys will get them there.
That. That's right.
All right, buddy. Hey, we're up against time, but I appreciate you coming on. This was great.
Hey, thanks.
It's always good to talk to you, my man.
You too. I appreciate you doing the podcast because the more we can get anyone engaged and informed, I love it. So kudos.
I think it's terrific.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.
All right.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll see you.